The Hamas terror attack on Israel is the largest mass murder of Jews since the Holocaust, says Israel's president. What he called his country's darkest hour has cast a long shadow worldwide. The assault on October 7th is prompting comparisons to massacres perpetrated by the terrorist group ISIS. Hamas fighters killed more than 1,000 Israelis, including babies, children, old people. They seized an unprecedented number of hostages. So far, at least 1,000 Palestinians have died during counterattacks by the Israeli army, which has blocked the Gaza Strip and mobilized a record 300,000 reservists. Why were Israel's vaunted military and intelligence services caught off guard? What will the attack mean for an already precarious region? Our topic today, Hamas-Terror against Israel. How will it change the Middle East? And welcome to The Point. It's a pleasure to introduce our guests, starting with Guido Steinberg, who is a terrorism expert at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, SWP. It's also a pleasure to welcome Daniel Dillon-Burma. He is a senior news editor on the Foreign Affairs desk at the German daily Die Welt. Shani Rosanis is a colleague here at DW. She's a commentator and editor for us and has also worked for media in her home country, Israel. And it's a pleasure to welcome, joining us virtually, Ofer Waldman. He is an independent author and a musician who's equally at home and in Germany and in Israel, and he joins us via Skype. And Ofer, if I may, I'd like to start with you. You are in Israel at the moment. Tell us how people are reacting to this worst attack in 50 years. Israel had been riven by divisions in recent months. Has that receded?
Well, the people are more preoccupied with overcoming the everyday challenges we have to help those who have been evacuated from Gaza, those who are being evacuated now from the northern borders. I would say the larger questions, like the question of social unity, about politics, these are questions that will have to wait until the war is over.
Thank you. And Shani, one of the striking things about the images that we've been seeing, images of terrified young concert goers, of blood-smeared homes in villages very close to the border, is the fact that people seem to have felt so safe there, so close to Gaza. It seems that that very high-tech, very expensive wall was viewed as an impenetrable barrier.
Correct. That was one of Israel's pillars of defense when it was looking into that region. The assumption was first that there will be head notice in the sense of intelligence, and that this barrier, which was, as you said, very expensive and very technologically advanced, will secure the border. And the failure of these two is still something that so many Israelis are grappling with still, and it's going to stay there for a long time. We're going to figure this out.
And we will come back to that question shortly. But Guido, let me ask you about the comparisons that we're hearing more and more now between Hamas and the incredible suffering that it wreaked in its attack and ISIS. Are those comparisons justified, and what do they tell us?
Well, both organizations come from totally different ideological backgrounds. And until recently, I would always have argued that Hamas is a lot more pragmatic in the Muslim Brotherhood tradition than ISIS was. But if we take a look at the violence that has been perpetrated over there, it primarily reminds me of the Yazidi genocide in Iraq. And this quest for an annihilation, not only of Israelis, but of Jews, is I think, something new, and that's quite comparable to ISIS. So I think when dealing with the organization, we should perhaps not think as much of Hamas of former times, but rather of fighting an organization that is a lot closer to ISIS than we previously thought.
Daniel, what will have been the driver for Hamas to perpetrate this attack now, at this moment in time? What do we know about Hamas' aims here?
Well, there is some speculation over that. One of the most plausible explanations is that the sponsors of Hamas were interested in stopping the rapprochement between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which would have been really a serious blow to Iranian strategy in the region. But I think we can't take this completely for granted. At least the United States say they have no indication that Iran directly ordered this attack, but we can be sure it couldn't have happened without Iranian approval. And as for Hamas, they always have an interest in dealing fatal blows to Israel.
Also, Melinda, I can quickly add to that. We know this was in the making for many months, over a year already. And the Saudi-American ties that have been exposed, this just happened recently. So there's something deeper there, connecting more to what Guido was saying about where Hamas is heading ideologically, what we're seeing as the hatred running deep and how it channels the actions of this organization.
And Ofer, all of this is taking place in a region that was already a tinderbox. What potential reverberations worry you the most?
Well, honestly speaking, as I'm talking to you from the northern part of Israel next to Haifa, as I was driving around my hometown here in northern Israel, seeing all the tanks, seeing all the military, we're looking towards north to the Lebanese border. We ask ourselves, how will the Hezbollah react? How will Iran react? It is, I must admit, as an Israeli, again, living now, being in northern Israel, very reassuring to see the strong U.S.-American response, sending a carrier here to the region to send a message, don't, as President Biden said, don't, back off.
And U.S. Foreign Minister also traveling to the region as well. Let's take a closer look at the Hamas attack and its potential reverberations in the region.
Hamas, an Islamist terrorist group, fired more than 2,000 rockets at Israel on October 7th alone. It broke through the barrier around the Gaza Strip using explosives and bulldozers. According to Israeli reports, some 1,500 militants breached the Israeli military blockade of Gaza into Israeli territory and killed more than 1,200 people on the street and in their homes, including young people attending a music festival. About 150 people, including women and children, have been taken hostage. The Iranian head of state, Ayatollah Khamenei, praised the attack while rejecting accusations that it had been orchestrated by the Mullah regime. But some analysts say that a large-scale attack of this nature would have not been possible without support from Tehran. Iran has repeatedly threatened to destroy its perceived arch-enemy, Israel. For years, the regime has aided the militant Islamist group Hamas, providing money, weapons, and training. Iran has also threatened Israel with the help of Hezbollah, its ally militia in Lebanon, widely considered a terrorist organization. Hezbollah immediately expressed solidarity with Hamas by firing rockets at the Israeli border. Can Israel defeat Hamas by military means?
Guido, I'd like to put that question to you, but coupled with some of the language that Israeli leaders are using. They're talking about eliminating Hamas when they describe their intentions. Gaza is a dense urban area. Hamas fighters are surrounded by civilians. So what does a campaign of elimination look like?
Well, we don't know exactly what the Israeli war plan will be, but according to what leaders say, we will have to expect a ground offensive through the whole Gaza Strip. And I think that the Israeli military is capable of destroying the structures of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Many Hamas fighters will die, perhaps most of them. Many Israeli soldiers will die and many civilians will die. No matter how careful the Israeli military proceeds, I don't think there is any alternative if the Israeli government really wants to go through all the Gazan cities.
Daniel, the EU's foreign policy chief and a number of other leaders as well have warned that Israel, as it embarks on a military campaign, must respect international law, avoid harming civilians. Is that wishful thinking?
It will be hard to do that, but if you take international law quite literally, international law does recognize the fact that civilian casualties happen in wars. International law says that warring parties need to take every measure they can in order to protect civilians. But what is sure is that we will see a lot of civilian casualties, and we will also see media and policy campaigning from the Hamas side and also in many Arab states that will accuse Israel of needlessly slaughtering Palestinians. This will be part of the political fight around this conflict.
You recently wrote that making peace with Hamas is impossible, out of the question. So I know it's early days, but what does that mean? How does this end?
Well, I think making peace with Hamas is at least close to impossible because of its fundamentalist religious ideology, and also because it's not up to Hamas alone to make peace. It is also an instrument of Iranian foreign policy. I think if we want to settle the conflict around Hamas for good, then it would need a grand settlement in the Middle East that would somehow at least limit the confrontation with Iran from Israel, but also from many Arab states. This is part of the context, at least for Iran.
And we'll come back to that point. But Shani, let me ask you about the hostage situation. Hamas has some 150 Israeli hostages, including old and young people, children, mothers. It has threatened to murder them if Israel attacks in the Gaza Strip indiscriminately without warning. Do you think that will deter the Israeli authorities?
Well, officially they say it won't. All the statements we've been hearing from Israeli officials is that they're going to fight Hamas as if there are no hostages, only maybe in specific cases when they know of specific place where they're being held, it might deter them. It's a terrible position that it puts the Israeli leadership in. You cannot. They don't control Gaza. They don't know what's happening in the underground level of the tunnels in Gaza and where these people are hidden. They're not even sure how many of them are there held by Hamas. And Hamas is very purposely hiding that, to use that. I wouldn't put it past them to use the hostages in any way possible. Israel is it's always a touchy subject in Israel, and this time specifically, the greater the outcry from the public will be, the harder it will be for the Israeli leadership to ignore this topic.
Ofer, in the past, Israel has participated in hostage exchanges. In fact, the current head of Hamas in Gaza was a member of a mass group that was swapped for one Israeli prisoner, namely Gilad Shalit. Do you think any kind of negotiations would be going on now? Is there any way to try to effect such a swap at this time?
Well, there are attempted negotiations via Qatar, via Egypt, actually, as one reads, via Germany as well. We have a different dimension now. As you have rightly mentioned, Gilad Shalit was one person who was exchanged to around 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israel. We have now around 150 Israeli prisoners or Israeli victims sitting in the Gaza Strip, young babies, old people. And I must say, it is a challenge. Talking as a journalist, it is a challenge to talk about these things, to talk about the human sufferings of these people. Actually, to also talk about the human suffering of the civil population in Gaza in a remote manner. Maybe because I sit in Israel, it is rather difficult. And I ask myself, in order to avoid from the destruction that awaits now the Gaza Strip from an Israeli offensive, I think that it is the role maybe of the Arabic world. It is definitely the role of the Palestinian diaspora to sound a clear voice that whatever Hamas has done made it actually is not a thing that has been done on behalf of the Palestinian people. It is not a thing that has been done for the Palestinian struggle for independence. And that might give a perspective, that might give a way to relieve Gaza and relieve Israel from Hamas and avoid civilian casualties on both sides as much as possible.
Are you hearing voices like that, for example, from members of Fatah, which is usually viewed as the moderate Palestinian representative?
There are two answers to this question. The Arabic silence, especially the silence of the Palestinian autonomy and the silence of the Palestinian diaspora, is painful in our ears, especially those of us who have been struggling side alongside with the Palestinians for Palestinian statehood. But within Israel, we see in a row of Jewish Arabic NGOs, we hear voices of solidarity regarding these attacks. We hear voices who say this has nothing to do with the Palestinian struggle. This has nothing to do with Islam. But again, the silence of the Palestinian diaspora, the silence of the Palestinian authority is painful.
We also need to keep in mind, Melissa, there's Muslim victims among the Israelis and still being bombarded. There are many Muslim, Arab Israelis sharing destiny and faith with Israelis shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah. Guido, those Palestinian civilians in Gaza, Israel has called on them to leave, undoubtedly, as it's considering a ground offensive. But where are they supposed to go? Egypt, for one, has refused to set up safe corridors for refugees to leave the Gaza Strip.
Well, there is an area in the Gaza Strip where they could possibly go in the southeast, and I think that that the Israeli military would be ready to respect the safety of any persons in the area. But quite in general, there simply won't be enough space for Gazans to leave if Egypt does not let them enter the country. And it seems as if Egypt will not do that. Again, if Israel attacks, no matter whether there are humanitarian corridors inside or outside of Gaza, many civilians will die.
Daniel, can you say a word about, again, how you see the further progression in Gaza? Let's say Israel does conduct this campaign to eliminate Hamas. What does it have to do after that? Reoccupy Gaza? It has been profoundly reluctant to do so. It left more than 20 years ago and has attempted to contain rather than to occupy. Will that change?
Well, I think it might change, and actually when you talk to members of the Israeli military and to some politicians behind closed doors, they will tell you that maybe it was really a mistake to move out of Gaza in 2005, and that it has been evident that you can't control this place from the outside, that you can't prevent it from becoming a time bomb that explodes in regular intervals. So I think this is definitely not out of the question. But I think we also have to keep in mind that there are also problems brewing in the West Bank. And this could be another problem that Israel has to deal with, either politically or security-wise, maybe even within the course of this conflict.
Let me ask, I'm going to switch focus a bit and come back to how this could have happened. And Shani, if I look at the headlines in Israel, I see headlines like Netanyahu's recklessness has brought war upon Israel. That's a quote from Haaretz, the left-leaning Israeli newspaper. Despite the mood of national unity, or at least solidarity, would you say that this is provoking criticism, and is the debacle as much a political one as a military one?
Well, everybody feels something is off. Right, left, strong supporters of Netanyahu, everybody understands this is an unprecedented failure. This is an unprecedented shock and trauma. There are attempts, mostly from above, from politicians, to put politics aside, but the rage is such that these voices cannot be tamed for too long. There is no doubt Netanyahu has been the prime minister for for 16 years almost, other than a short interval last year. He has appointed many of the heads of the security and defense apparatus. He has been campaigning to be Mr. Defense. This is his claim for fame. And failing in this point, it's going to be something that's going to be very hard for him to dodge. So I think also if we want to stay away from cynical look into politics, this is the role of leadership, taking responsibility. The Israeli people, many of them feel they have been left without anyone taking responsibility to fend for themselves during that attack and in the days that they are still following, with the great need that is there and very little response from the government So it has to go hand in hand. We have to see it together.
Guido, U.S. leaders are saying that Egypt actually warned Israel about 3 days before the attack that something like this might be coming. And it seems that Hamas, in part through disinformation, managed to lull the Israeli security services into a false sense of security. So how was that possible, and what does it tell us about a vaunted military and intelligence power?
Look, I'm not that sure that the intelligence failure is as big as it is being depicted right now, simply because Hamas is a very professional, very secretive, highly ideological organization. It is capable of hiding some things, especially because the Israelis were expecting a similar attack, not from the Gaza Strip, but from the north. For months already. So I'm not that sure that, and you always have to expect that your intelligence services don't get prior information about operations. They are not perfect. It's a very, very hard job. They have been extremely successful for decades, but things like that happen. And that is why on such a border you need the military. But the military wasn't there. Theoretically, it should be one division, let's say about 20,000 soldiers. They were not there. So that's the failure of the military leadership and of the political leadership. And I agree, some months after this war has ended, I believe Netanyahu and some others will have to leave.
Netanyahu has now gone into a unity government with the centrist opposition leader Benny Gantz, who has a great deal of military experience. But the extreme right-wing members of Netanyahu's coalition remain in the government, as I understand it. So what, if anything, will change?
I would allow me, please, to rephrase your question a little bit. Netanyahu was forced into a government of national unity. We had to wait for 5 days for this government of national unity to be formed. We had to wait for 7, 8, 9 hours before Netanyahu, who is actually usually he jumps in front of every camera before he talked to the Israeli people, explaining what is going on. Actually, the only act of political leadership that we have seen in Israel in the past few days came from U.S. President Joe Biden. It did not come from the Israeli leadership. And if to follow up on what Guido Steinberg just said, the military was not there. Where was it? The question is, where was it? I know these are questions that will be discussed after the war is over, but we know that the Israeli military, and this, reflects upon your question about the right-wing, the right extremists in the Israeli government, has created many provocations in the West Bank through the settler movement, and the Israeli army was forced to take care of those provocations. So we ask ourselves, where was the military? What is the role of the political leadership in Israel in allowing this horrible attack to happen? And I'm sorry to say, I hope that Guido Steinberg is right and that Netanyahu will not survive this war, this bloodiest day for the Jewish people since 1945. But the Israeli politics is since 10, 11 months anything else but rational. So we'll have to wait and see.
Daniel, I'd like to briefly.
Yeah, the failure is in the macro. We're not into the details of what happened to the intelligence. The failure is the short-sightedness. The failure is the arrogance. The failure is the lack of prospect that Netanyahu is not, has given or not given to the region, to the Palestinians for many years. This is where the failure is.
Let me come back to another dimension that was covered briefly in our report that we saw earlier, and that is Iran's ongoing support for Hamas and for Hezbollah. Daniel, you have called Hezbollah Iran's sharpest sword. So 2 quick questions, if I may. What do we know about Iran's involvement in the attack itself, whether there was explicit foreknowledge and intentionality? And secondly, what do we think about whether Hezbollah will jump into the fray?
Well, as for Iran and its involvement, as I've said, it's inconceivable that this would have happened without Iran knowing and approving it. There have been reports from Lebanon that there was a meeting between Iranian, Hamas and Hezbollah leaders on Monday before the attack. This is not a confirmed report, so we should treat it with caution. But it is possible that Iran was closely involved, at least as an observer in that. As for
Yeah, please.
You wanted to interrupt?
Please. No.
As for Hezbollah, Hezbollah is mainly so strong because it has a huge arsenal of missiles. Not all of them are really advanced missiles, although there are some guided and precision missiles among them, but the sheer number of missiles could cause a huge problem for Israeli missile defense, which, as we know, is probably the most advanced in the world. I don't think that Hezbollah wants to enter the fight at the moment. There's a tit-for-tat at the north, but this could escalate, and it is already escalating.
Guido, our title asks whether this will change the Middle East. Could we see this turn into a regional, even an international conflagration?
It's a plausible scenario. If Hezbollah intervenes, if Hezbollah sees itself forced into a confrontation with Israel, that is a scenario, and that's the very reason why we have seen the movement of the American aircraft carrier towards the eastern Mediterranean. I hope that we will see a relatively short war in Gaza, but I'm not that sure that that this will be the reality in the coming weeks.
I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much to all of you for being with us today. Thanks to our viewers for tuning in. See you soon.